Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about cosmology. So, for those who are unfamiliar, uh, cosmology is kind of it's the core stories that we use to orient ourselves in the world. And I was talking to my brother about this recently, and one of the observations I have made is that everyone has a cosmology of some variety. Now, frequently we'll talk about a culture's cosmology or a religion's cosmology, in that, it's their creation, origin story, and it's about where they're going. There's a lot of people who have considered themselves so advanced they don't need these stories anymore. But unfortunately, that is not the case. Everyone has a cosmology of some variety. If you think that you don't, then, just stop and consider what it is that you think when you think about what came before or what happens later. Because even the idea that there's nothing that came before is a cosmology. In fact, the ideas that lead to nihilism, like, that is informed by a view of the cosmos. So this whole cosmology thing, it's still relevant. And the reason why I am thinking about this is we get a lot of meaning, and we interpret everything around us according to the cosmology that we have really accepted, and that shapes our worldview. Now, there is a lot of criticism for the biblical cosmology. A lot of people want to poke fun at that, and like, whether or not those stories are literal or figurative. Getting too wrapped up in that is actually just even asking the wrong questions of them. What questions you want to ask of your cosmology are: how does it help you understand where you are now, given origins and anticipated futures? The cosmology that states that where the culmination of random chance is not a meaningful cosmology. In fact, that's a cosmology that allows us to take shortcuts and adopt ways of thinking that are actually, it can convince us to do things that are harmful. Now, a cosmology that features a creator, a cosmology that not just a creator, but that someone who cares about us had a hand in that creation. That's a cosmology that is actually what I would dare say much of our civilization until recently has been at least trying to recognize. Because when you have a creator that cares about you, that is trying to help you to advance, that's a much more meaningful story. And when you can find stories in your cosmology that also include, like, explanations as to why things get difficult, these now suddenly start becoming tools. And instead of saying it's all random chance and we're just, stuff's going to happen and then we're going to cease to exist, like, that kind of nihilistic way of or nihilistic cosmology, it's not enough to give us meaning. It's not enough to give me meaning. And so I just kind of want to sit with that for a minute here. Over the years, I've been trying to figure out, having life that is meaningful. And I would dare say, I think it was actually about 11 or 12 years ago. I was getting introduced specifically to the named ideas of nihilism, and I was kind of going back and forth on that. And what I arrived at is that just because I don't see a particular meaning in things around me does not mean that there is not one there. And there is something that was actually somewhat freeing about that. Because just because you don't see something doesn't mean that it's not there. It's invisible to you as a phenomenon. It can impact you. But, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And so from that starting point, I've kind of gone on a bit of a journey trying to figure out, well, what meaning is there, even if I can't see it? And, I come from a religious background. But I also come from a religious background that in the temple teachings has the warning, oh, you want religion, do you? You want me to preach to you? And, you were then offered the philosophies of men mingled with Scripture, which, we've got plenty of that running around today. Everybody's got that. Every religion has the philosophies of men mingled with Scripture, which is, we take the philosophy of our time and we either create it from what is in Scripture or we project it onto Scripture, and we do that instead of trying to figure out who the Creator is directly. So, getting back to cosmologies and this idea that it is linked to our creation stories, the first thing that I really felt like was lacking in the biblical creation was the mother. Now, the mother is supremely important. We all think of God as him. And as far as I have been able to work out, God is a them because neither is the man without the woman nor the woman without the man. And so as what I am able to work out from kind of these ideas and other things that I have found, that one cannot be complete and whole enough to ascend to the position that, who we refer to as God is, without bringing together both that masculine and feminine aspect. And, this is something that's interesting because, in addition to the biblical creation story, I've run across the creation stories in the Nemenhah record temple teachings and in the Byirkenhol tablets temple teachings. And both of those creations specifically include the mother. And, this really stands out to me in a world where people are very upset about the patriarchy and are very upset about how women are oppressed. And I'm not about to say that there is not evidence for that. There absolutely is. But as far as I can tell, the bigger problem is that both men and women are injured by the masculine and the feminine being out of balance with each other. And, I feel like we've seen this with feminism over the last 50 years where, we're well, not 50 years, 100 years, where we're trying to recover from, things from women having no rights. And that's just the way things are at that starting point, or at least that's how the story goes. And then, we have inverted that to a point where there are some ways in which there are privileges that have been granted out of balance. And, we've tried to just rectify things by making law, but we haven't rectified things, or we haven't reconciled things with trying to understand, a deeper meaning. Our cosmology doesn't handle like our shared cultural cosmology. I'm here in the United States. We have certain things that are kind of the philosophical averages, and what we have doesn't really contemplate that reconciliation and balance that's necessary between the masculine and feminine, and so now we've got big problems as a result. Now, we've got the 4th of July coming up. We'll see if it's before or after this actually gets published. But I think there's a lot to be pondered here in, our founding myths. A cosmology primarily comes out of our founding myths. And so we've got the founding myths, or the founding stories of how all things came into existence. Then we also, we all live in a country, because there is no place on earth that is a frontier anymore. And every country, every political subdivision that you live within has its founding story. And I find it interesting, getting back into this idea of cosmology, that, when we celebrate the signing of the Declaration of Independence, we are celebrating the beginning of a redemption through bloodshed. It is a story of redemptive sacrifice that we refer to as the Revolutionary War. Now, what's interesting to me as I consider, we have Jesus in the Bible, we have Thunaraz in the Byirkenhol tablets. We've got these different stories that, when we consider the wider meaning of the Christian redemption narrative, what's interesting is that is a redemption that is through peace. And that is a redemption that is through reconciliation. And, this is, once again, why we have to really start examining what our cosmology is, because if we accept the founding myth of we are redeemed through violence and human sacrifice in the form of going to war, we have to contend with where that really lies with, if for anyone who is a Christian, but also just like how sustainable is that as a founding myth when, everything after that, there's still this sense of, we've got to, from time to time, we're going to have to do this redemptive violence thing again, as opposed to, some of these other cosmologies that I have found where the whole point is to become reconciled with the Creator. And in being reconciled with the Creator, you no longer have to go through these cycles of war, and you no longer have to go through these periods of fighting. But the trickiest thing is when we look at these stories, the things we start having to focus on are what are our contributions, in some cases to the short-term thinking that makes it necessary to, pick war instead of peace. But this is I think this is about where I want to finish this up, because I could probably go for another half hour just kind of wandering in this direction. But I want you to, really think about what are the stories that are meaningful to you, because like I've described some of what's meaningful to me, but what's meaningful to me doesn't matter in your life. But I'm hoping for other people to like really examine what the underlying stories are. Like, what is it that gives you the sense of hope that like things are worth working on, or a sense of despair that, well, there's no way to fix this? Because if we're going to not just watch our world burn down, we've got to find something that gives us hope that there's something worth working for. And I hope you'll give that some thought. And I think I will get back to my game. You have a good day.